Hi, it's Katrina. The lost city of the Kalahari. It was in 1885 when the Canadian explorer, entertainer, and inventor William Leonard Hunt documented a mysterious lost city deep in the Kalahari Desert. Also known as the Great Farini, all these years later, we still don't know what he actually found on that fateful expedition, or if he might have even made the whole thing up. Hunt is remembered as the first Westerner to cross the Kalahari Desert on foot and survive. When he returned to Europe, he described in a paper he presented to the Royal Geographical Society a ruined city of biblical proportions. He said he found a giant wreckage of stones, something that looked like a temple or a tomb, blocks sculpted from red sand, and evidence of a huge metropolis. However, Hunt said it was obvious the city had either been destroyed by an earthquake, a blast, or something equally as devastating. Whatever remained of the city after its destruction was washed away by the desert sands over thousands of years. Starting in 1932, there have been roughly 25 expeditions launched to find this mythical city. None of them have ever been successful. We don't know if there ever was a city in the desert or who could have possibly built it. It's not impossible, seeing as the Kalahari is a massive sandy desert 180 million years old. The shifting sands could easily bury an entire civilization, but to imagine people went into the desert and built the city is kind of hard to do. And the Great Farini had a wonderful imagination, so it's hard to tell if he actually did find a lost city or if it was part of his adventures and imagination. The lost city of Marawi. Marawi is located south of Aswan, just over the modern Egyptian border into the country of Sudan. Thousands of years ago, this was a major metropolis belonging to the ancient kingdom of Kush. The city was home to thousands of people and dotted by dozens of pyramids, unlike anything that's ever been built in Egypt. All that remains of the once great city are now the ruins of those pyramids, almost all of them broken in half, standing like shattered black obelisks against the brown wasteland of the deserts. It's hard to believe now that anybody lived in this place. But a lot of people did. The ancient city of Marawi was strategically built at a crossroad between many civilizations, where traders could stop, take a rest, and peddle their wares. This was around the year 1069 BC. It flourished up until the year 350 AD, when the Kushites were utterly decimated by the Aksumite Empire of Ethiopia. In terms of human civilization, this was a major chunk of time. If you want to compare it to somewhere like the United States, the city of Marawi prospered for over 1,000 years longer than the United States has even been around. By far, the most fascinating part of Marawi is its pyramids. To the Egyptians, these people were called the Nubians, and because of their close proximity, it's no surprise they were influenced by Egyptian culture. Likewise, the Egyptians were inspired by the Nubians. But rather than making enormous pyramids that could touch the sky, the Nubians went for the numbers. They built far more pyramids than the Egyptians could ever dream of, but they were much smaller and made of darker stone. Several still survive today, but are gradually fading with the rest of this forgotten place. The Khazar Capital. Atil was once the capital of the Khazar Empire, but nobody knows where it is. It was occupied at least between the 8th century and the 10th century, and was somewhere in what is today Russia, but nobody has been able to find it. Some archaeologists don't even believe it's around anymore, as they say it was probably washed away when the Caspian Sea rose thousands of years ago. Excavations in 2003 by experts with the Astrakhan State University found ruins near the village of Samosdelka in Russia containing artifacts from the Khazar, but they were unable to confirm the site as the location of Atil. But who were the Khazar anyway? The Khazar was a confederation of tribes that covered a huge section of European Russia starting in the 6th century. Nobody knows where exactly these people came from or much about their earlier history. However, we know they had contact with the Persians. They got some help from the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius in the early 600s, and they became an independent empire by the 7th century. Then, as the Arabs continued their northward expansion into the Caucasus in the middle of the 8th century, the Khazars were dragged into war. They were forced to abandon many of their cities. The fighting spread as far as Armenia, and then the Khazar were scattered to the winds. Ever since, their capital has been lost. The lost city of Z. Percy Fawcett was the great explorer who ventured into the jungles of the Amazon in search of a lost city and never returned. Depending on who you ask, Percy was either a brilliant adventurer or an incompetent lunatic. He's been described as both by people who knew him in the late 1800s. What we do know is that Percy was a territorial explorer, a man who went to places that had never been mapped with nothing but a machete and a compass. He met tribes, explored the world, and was even the inspiration behind Indiana Jones, allegedly. He spent 18 months on the frontier between Brazil and Bolivia in 1906, at which point he became convinced there was a lost civilization somewhere in the area. In 1912, he referred to this place as the Lost City of Z. In 1921, Percy and his team went out to find the city. They didn't get far, as most of his team became infected with diseases. They were besieged by wild animals, and they couldn't make it through the raw jungle. It was a total failure. In April of 1925, Percy set out on his final mission. He was joined by his oldest son, some Brazilians, and other researchers. He reached the unexplored territory in May of that same year, but we don't know what happened after that. 2 years passed and nobody heard a word from them. He was gone, and so was his team. 13 expeditions were launched to find out what happened to Percy, and over 100 people died without any success, all while trying to get through the jungle. We still don't know if the lost city of Z is even real. Underwater city in the Gulf of Mexico. An amateur archaeologist recently announced the unbelievable discovery of a lost city 12,000 years old. Let me start off by saying his discovery has not been touched remotely by any professional archaeologists. But his name is George Gill, and his supposed lost city includes a pyramid, and it's hiding off the coast of Louisiana. According to George, he has taken no less than 44 trips to the site where he says there are ruins. The location is near the Chandeleur Islands in the Gulf of Mexico, about 50 miles off the coast. He claims to have seen with his own eyes a pyramid structure in the center of a massive city built of granite. There are hundreds of buildings, all of them covered with sand and silt. The city was apparently built by people thousands of years ago who floated stones down the Mississippi River. They then assembled them off the coast near what is now New Orleans. This would have been 12,000 years ago, right around the time humans first entered North America. If this were true, this discovery would flip the world of archaeology on its head. But unfortunately, George doesn't have the proof he needs to change the history books. He claims the structures are down there, but no scientist has confirmed it yet, and George doesn't have any physical evidence. While he could be right, the scientific community would be genuinely shocked. The lost city of the Arabian sands. There is supposedly a lost city called Ubar hiding underneath the sands of the Ramlat Shuyat in Dhofar. This is on the Arabian Peninsula. Legend has it the city was once rich in treasure, filled with beautiful gardens, and had walls of tall red stone. It was supposedly found by the Western explorer Bertram Thomas back in 1930, but it was in a horrible state of disrepair. Several missions were led after by Thomas, but nobody has ever been able to document the lost city, although several different explorers said that they saw it in 1993 and 1998. It's apparently located near a giant sinkhole in Chisur, an isolated waterhole in the middle of a sandy wasteland. This city has been called the Atlantis of the Sands for how mysterious it is. Arab historians don't think it ever existed and believe the name Ubar simply refers to the desert region. However, there's no denying that archaeological sites have been discovered in the desert here. In 2007, excavations near the sinkhole revealed the ruins of a fortress, as well as artifacts from Persia, Rome, and Greece. Clearly, the area was much more active about 2,000 years ago. There must have been a city somewhere, but no researcher can actually locate it for the life of them. We don't even know who could have built it. Etzanoa. The lost city of Etzanoa was rediscovered in June of 2015 by the archaeologist Don Blakesley and his team of researchers. They identified what they believe to be the entire region that Etzanoa once encompassed in Kansas. If you've never heard of Etzanoa before, you're not alone. When Spanish explorers entered what is now Kansas in 1601, they claimed to come across a great settlement. But nobody took much interest until the 1930s, when excavations began in places around Arkansas City. Archaeologists found plenty of ancient sites that were once populated by the Wichita indigenous people. However, they concluded that these were individual towns and villages, not one massive city. But they were wrong. Underneath what is now Arkansas City and spreading for miles to the north was Etzanoa, one of the biggest cities in North America before Europeans arrived. It was populated by around 20,000 ancestral Wichita. What archaeologists mistook for single settlements were actually clusters of houses, kind of like what we think of as suburbs. Had the Europeans never arrived and the Spanish never shown up and started massacring everyone, this very well could have turned into the biggest city in North America. At the time, it rivaled even the great Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in Mexico City. The Turquoise Mountain. The minaret of Jam is the very last piece of architecture still standing within the lost city of Turquoise Mountain. It's a tower that was built in the 12th century in Afghanistan, standing over 180 feet above the valley below. The tower was once a shining monument in the Turquoise Mountain, the legendary lost capital of Afghanistan in the Middle Ages. This was back when the country was ruled by the Ghurid Empire, during a time when Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived in the same city in relative harmony. Historians believe it wasn't until the destruction and subsequent vanishing of the city that the practitioners of these religions became divided, squabbling enemies. At least this is what the evidence tells us. Turquoise Mountain was supposedly a multicultural center and a prospering city. It was home to a Jewish trading community, as is evident by the inscriptions left behind on tombstones discovered in the 1950s. It thrived up until the early part of the 1220s, when the son of Genghis Khan, Ogedei Khan, showed up and trashed the place. Like I said before, the tower is the only thing left. If not for this single spire reaching for the sky, you wouldn't even know an ancient city once stood here. There's nothing else left. And when the tower falls, that will be the last vestige of the last city of the Ghurid Empire gone. The Invisible City. Here's something you probably never expected to hear. In the video game franchise Tomb Raider, Lara Croft goes searching for the lost mythical city of Kites. It's a major plot in some of the games from the franchise. But the truth is that the mythical city may actually have been a real place. It might be lost underneath the water of Russia's Lake Svetloyar. Archaeologists in 2011 discovered objects underneath the water here, which they believe were lost when the city sank. The legend of the city goes back to the early part of the 13th century. Little Kites was founded by the Grand Prince of Vladimir, Prince Georgy, in what is now the Nizhny Novgorod Oblast of Russia. This is a very real place that has survived over 700 years and is still standing today. But a little way off, the prince allegedly found a beautiful place where he wanted to make a new city. That became Big Kites. It was considered a holy place. Monasteries and churches were built in the dozens, but its exact location was a secret to outsiders. When Batu Khan and the Golden Horde showed up in 1238, they destroyed Little Kites and went looking for Big Kites. They discovered it, but then something strange happened. The Mongolians were shocked because there were no walls, no army, and nothing to stop them from taking the place over. All they saw were the citizens gathered together and praying. Then water started squirting out of the lake. There was a great rumble, and the city sank right before their eyes. At least this is the myth. Now that researchers have actually found archaeological traces of the city at the bottom of the lake, it looks like there could be some truth to it. The city definitely didn't descend into the water on its own, but could have been submerged as the result of a sudden earthquake. Ganja Nagara. Ganja Nagara is the mythical lost city of a Malay Indian kingdom that once ruled a large part of Malaysia in the 2nd century. Researchers believe the kingdom collapsed after it was attacked by King Rajendra Chola I of South India, sometime around 1025. However, no trace of the city has ever been found. It was likely the Ganja Nagara kingdom who built the city, active between 100 and 1000 AD. And yes, these people named their great city after themselves. Why not? They probably arrived in the region as Hindu traders, part of a group who built colonies all throughout Southeast Asia, in places like Cambodia, Thailand, and Sri Lanka. One legend even says the founder was a direct descendant of Alexander the Great. Maybe that's why they managed to get themselves a much larger piece of the pie than the rest of the colonies, taking over Malaysia and trading with faraway lands. Sadly, there is very little archaeological evidence of these people. There are artifacts, but they are spread across Malaysia and don't indicate a single capital being in any particular spot. It definitely existed, but all traces of Ganja Nagara are long gone. Lacus courteous. Lacus courteous was once believed by the Romans to be a gateway to hell, although it doesn't look much like a portal to the netherworld today. The once frightening supposed entrance to the underworld has now been paved over. There is nothing left to mark the place except a circular slab of stone. But in ancient times, there was a terrifying chasm here. The origins of this place are quite mysterious. As Rome was moving into the Republican period, Lacus Courteous was a place of great mystery and intrigue. Legend says that the hole opened by itself after the oracle foretold of Rome's inevitable fall. It was meant to be a passage to the underworld and a place for a sacrifice that could save the empire. A young soldier named Marcus Courteous offered himself in order to save Rome. He dressed fully in battle armor, got into his great steed, and rode his horse directly into the pit of doom. He died and was never seen again, but Rome was safe, at least for the time being. This is just one of the many legends surrounding the enormous pit. The truth is that the whole area was once a wild swamp, and the pit was probably just an ordinary sinkhole. It took on a myth of its own thanks to the superstitions of the Romans. Temple of Doom. A mysterious and terrifying Temple of Doom has been discovered at an ancient archaeological site in Turkey. Researchers believe the temple likely belonged to a group of cultists who had decorated the structure with human heads. The discovery was made inside the world's oldest temple, Göbekli Tepe, and it dates back 11,500 years. 3 skull fragments were found at a dig site here, each one of them showing evidence of mutilation after death. According to anthropologist Julia Gresky, each skull was found with deep incisions left by a knife. One even had a hole in it that looked as though it had been drilled. All these markings suggest a process called defleshing. This was when the flesh from a skull was scraped off using a primitive stone tool. There are a few different reasons the ancient people worshipping at this temple could have had a fascination with skulls. Rituals, ancestor worship, or the belief in some kind of mystical power associated with them are all possible. And though researchers have found only 3 of them, there were likely many more skulls to be found at the site long ago. The King's Grave. One of the biggest stone graves from the Nordic Bronze Age can be found in Sweden. It's in the southwestern part of the country and is a massive burial cairn. What makes the burial mound so impressive is its size. It's absolutely enormous at 75 meters in diameter. It was made around the year 1600 BC and stands out from other tombs in Europe because it's decorated with petroglyphs. There are strange images of animals, people, symbols, musical instruments, and even curious figures in robes dancing. As for its discovery, the mysterious Kivik King's Grave, as it's called, was a quarry for construction materials up until 1748. That was when a pair of farmers stumbled upon the tomb by accident. They explored it heavily in hopes of uncovering ancient treasure. The site was excavated properly in the 1930s, but by then had likely been pillaged pretty heavily and documented poorly. Even though it's called the King's Grave, we don't know who was buried inside the tomb. As it turned out, the remains of several teenagers were discovered inside. In the time since, researchers have opened the space to tourists. The ghost city of Kuldara. The ghost city of Kuldara was a prosperous village about 300 years ago in the deserts of India. According to local legend, the ruler of the state, an evil and hated man by the name of Salim Singh, wanted to marry the daughter of the village chief. However, the daughter wasn't interested. Angrily, Singh threatened that if the village didn't give the woman up, he would have them destroyed. Instead of giving in to his wishes, the people of the 85 surrounding villages disappeared, cursing Kuldara so that no one would settle there again as they left. And to this day, the village remains completely barren. No one has lived here in centuries. The locals claim that strange paranormal phenomena allegedly happens within its boundaries. However, the more historically accurate account of events would be that Salim Singh raised the taxes to such an extreme extent that the local villagers could no longer afford to stay there, and so the people migrated and left their city to become a ruin. Tomb of the Winged Demons. The Tomb of the Winged Demons in Tuscany is a strange and spooky archaeological site. The tomb gets its name from the sculptures of winged demons that watch over the niche where an unknown person was laid to rest around 2,300 years ago. On the pediment at the entrance is a huge winged sea demon called a Scylla, while inside 2 female demons and a pair of lions once stood guard outside. The tomb itself isn't that large, more like a cubic block carved straight out of the stone. The tomb was created by the ancient Etruscans before the Romans rose to power. These demons depicted here have nothing to do with Christianity, but were instead beings created by the Etruscans. If you ever go to Tuscany, remember to stop by and visit the tomb. And of course, tell me all about it. Want to give a big shout out to Niala Kuro and Ghosty1969. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. We wouldn't be here without you guys. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like these. Mysterious dog burials. Archaeologists in England discovered a settlement from the Iron Age in a farmer's field in Polton. The settlement once consisted of a group of roundhouses made of earth and timber with thatched roofs. Over 5,000 artifacts have been uncovered here, including burials both human and animal. The strangest part by far have been the sacrificial dog burials. Inside one of the roundhouses was the home of the tribal chief, the person who presided over the entire settlement. Within his home, archaeologists came across all sorts of ritual deposits, including decorations made of antlers and the remains of 2 dogs. One was placed near the entrance and the other was buried in the center of the house. Each animal had been intentionally sacrificed, probably in exchange for prosperity and wealth. Iron Age communities often believed that by sacrificing creatures and burying them inside their homes, they would have great fortune. Sacrificing 2 important animals like dogs was typical of chiefs, who undoubtedly felt like they deserved to have the best luck of them all. City of the Dead. French archaeologists have uncovered a mysterious city of the dead over 1,000 years old. They found it in Corsica, a large island off the coast of France. It's a huge necropolis containing at least 40 tombs, with the bodies stored in giant jars that are normally found in North Africa. But because of the sheer number of civilizations that have ruled Corsica over the years, experts have no clue when these people were buried. They don't know when the City of the Dead first came about, though they believe it may have been 2,000 years ago with the rise of the Roman Empire. The necropolis was excavated in a sleepy fishing village on the coast. The town standing today was founded in the 18th century, but people have been living in the area for at least 6,000 years. The truly unique part of this great city of the dead is that the deceased were put into these huge jars. The remains of men, women, children, people of all sorts were found in these clay vessels. The archaeologists also found the remains of 40 villagers that had been buried behind a church about 1,400 years ago in the same area. Other archaeological evidence suggests these curious burials came from the days of the Romans. However, it also could have been the more mysterious Visigoths who built the necropolis, especially since they were considered more barbaric and would have had more unusual burial customs. The Aktun Tunichil Muknal Cave. In Belize, the Aktun Tunichil Muknal Cave is a dark, damp, and extremely spooky place. For the ancient Maya who lived here thousands of years ago, this cave was thought to be a physical entrance to the underworld, a place called Xibalba. When translated to English, Xibalba means place of fear. Xibalba was considered the otherworldly realm where spirits went when they died. Like many other ancient people, the Maya believed this world of the dead could be accessed through underground passages. The cave was first discovered in 1989, with archaeological research starting soon after in 1993. It's about 3 miles deep and has yielded over 1,400 artifacts. The Maya left behind pieces of pottery, tools, and one particularly fascinating relic called a monkey pot. A monkey pot is a simple pot, but with a monkey on its rim. It's one of only 4 such artifacts that have ever been found in Central America, making it very rare. Archaeologists have also found human remains here that showed evidence of being bound and tortured. Inside one of the chambers, researchers also exhumed remains of people who had been killed using obsidian blades. Archaeologists believe this was some kind of extremely violent ritual. This was a cave of great and terrible power, and the Maya here conducted these violent rituals to honor the gods of death. Hot springs from hell. Chinoike Jigoku is a hot spring in Japan, unique among the 9 hot springs here in Beppu City. Each one of the hot springs has an unusual color and composition, with each one different from most of the natural springs you find around the country. But Chinoike Jigoku is by far the strangest, a small pool that's name translates to English as Bloody Hell Pond. The temperature of the pond is so hot it can be used for cooking. It reaches up to 174 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite its spooky name, the truth is that it's red boiling mud. But that didn't mean the Japanese couldn't use it for some pretty terrible practices. During the imperial period of Japan, this pond was used as both a punishment and torture. People were reportedly thrown into the pool and boiled to death. The Valley of No Return. The Valley of No Return in Brittany, France, maybe isn't as creepy as it is mystical. The place is also known as the domain of Morgan Le Fay, the half-sister of the legendary King Arthur and student in the magic of Merlin. It was here where Morgan turned the knight Guiomar and his lover to stone in a jealous fit of rage. She was so angry that the knight she loved had been found with another woman that she punished all men by casting a spell over the valley. Whenever someone walked through the valley, their soul became trapped for eternity, and they would have no notion of time or space. It was only when the brave knight Lancelot du Lac made good on his promise of love to the Queen Guinevere that the spell was broken and Morgan was forced to release her prisoners. These days, the valley isn't quite so evil. There are a few notable places like the Fairy's Mirror. It's right at the entrance of the valley and is said to be the border between the dream world and reality. Bridge of the Inca. The Bridge of the Inca is a fascinating monument and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It can be found high up in the Andes Mountains in Argentina, somewhere around 7,000 feet above sea level. The place is fascinating for two main reasons. First of all, it's a natural bridge and one of the most striking geological places in all of South America. Secondly, the Inca used the Puente del Inca as part of their vast road network. The whole region is riddled with ancient ruins, yet the bridge itself is 100% natural. The Inca didn't need to do anything in terms of construction. The bridge was already there. But of course, the Inca had some pretty cool legends surrounding the bridge. It's said that the heir to the throne of the empire was affected by a strange and mysterious paralysis. Healers recommended that the heir go from Cusco to the slopes of the Inca bridge to heal in the natural springs. But when they reached it, there was no bridge there. Inca warriors had to embrace each other and form a human bridge so that the paralyzed heir could be brought across. The heir was then dipped in the hot springs and magically healed. When he turned around, the Inca warriors had all petrified, creating the stone bridge that still stands today. A face in the mountain. A large and very mysterious face was recently found on the cliffside of an island in the Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. The face is exactly what it sounds like, a truly huge human face carved out of the rock on the side of a cliff in the absolute middle of nowhere. The face can be found on Reeks Island in British Columbia, Canada. This is not a place you can reach very easily and rarely sees human visitors. The person who found the face carved high up in the mountainous terrain of the island was Hank Gus, a member of the Teshat First Nation. Hank had heard about the face from a kayaker who saw it by accident. It then took Hank 2 years of tireless searching to finally find it himself. Now that's dedication. Have you ever been that dedicated to finding anything? Tell me about your experience in the comments. The face is about 7 feet tall and looks strikingly like some other faces made by the ancient Teshat people. They have been living in this part of British Columbia for thousands of years, so it's no surprise that there are still some archaeological treasures lying around undiscovered. This is one of the largest areas of untouched nature still left in the world, where massive stone faces can still go unseen for years. Prehistoric Campers. An interesting new study has given some insight into the patterns of mountain people in America 11,000 years ago. It was in the year 2006 that Dr. Richard Adams, an archaeologist from Laramie, Wyoming, discovered a prehistoric settlement 11,000 feet high in the mountains of Wyoming. It was an amazing discovery that turned the world of American archaeology upside down. Nobody had thought there would be an alpine village hidden so high in the mountains. It was assumed the native people lived in the flatlands and wouldn't have bothered going up so high. Archaeologists found pottery, bone tools, arrowheads, and other evidence that some primitive group had been there at least 2,000 years ago. Then the researchers started spreading out across the mountain ridges. They came across other sites, dozens of them, some over 11,000 years old. As it turned out, the mountain wilderness of Wyoming has been a popular destination for human settlers since around the time humans first arrived in America. People hunted in the mountain peaks, lived in basic huts, and didn't seem to mind the weather at all. But who exactly these people were, how extensive their settlements may have been, and where they went is still a total mystery. Lost City on the Mountain. Archaeologists discovered a lost city on the top of a Greek mountain that dates back 2,500 years. The fact that nobody ever found it until recently is kind of hard to imagine. It was in 2016 that the international team of Swedish and Greek archaeologists came across the lost city buried underneath the earth, 190 miles from Athens and way above sea level. It was found literally in the clouds on the Strongylovouni Hill, which is on the Thessalian plains. According to researcher Robin Runland, an expert in classical archaeology and ancient history, he and his team learned that nobody had ever explored this particular hill before. They didn't know what they were going to find, but knew it hadn't been looked at by archaeologists yet. So they climbed to its summit and found a city covering an area of 99 acres. They discovered walls and towers and were even greeted by the city gates upon their arrival. Though of course none of this was visible from the ground below. The only way to see it was by actually climbing the mountain and reaching its peak, which nobody had done before. It was one of the last explored places in Greece, and is still stumping scientists today. Researchers found pottery, coins, and other artifacts that have dated the city back to 500 BC. However, why it was abandoned, who founded the city in the first place, and what in the world it was doing on the top of a mountain are all questions that have still yet to be answered. Do you think there are any other unexplored places like this where an ancient city is sitting untouched, waiting to be found? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos like these coming soon. Ancient cave artifacts. A discovery in a Mexican cave located deep in a rural mountain range may just be changing the timeline of human arrivals in America. For pretty much all the 20th century, archaeologists have agreed that human beings crossed the land bridge from Siberia and entered North America no later than 1,300 years ago. Now, a new study at Chiquihuite Cave by researchers with the Autonomous University of Zacatecas has pushed the date back to 26,500 years. The cave, 9,000 feet above sea level in the Astillero Mountains, has revealed stone artifacts, tools used for cutting, animal bones, pieces of charcoal, and sediment samples, all dated over 26,000 years old. The consensus here is that humans came from Siberia much earlier than ever imagined, but that they meandered up into the mountains and lived in caves instead of building settlements. They very well could have lived in caves for 10,000 years until finally moving down into the lowlands, building settlements, and slowly evolving with the rest of humanity in other parts of the world. Would you want to live in a cave? Let me know in the comments below. Choquequirao. The Cradle of Gold, also known as Choquequirao, was built by the great Inca Empire sometime in the 15th century. It covers a massive area of over 4,000 acres and is a shocking 9,000 feet above sea level. Forget about Machu Picchu, this is the true lost mountain city of the Inca. It overlooks the Apurimac River, probably founded by Topa Yupanqui, the 10th Sapa Inca and 5th ruler of the Hanan dynasty. He was also the son of Pachacuti, who was responsible for founding Machu Picchu. As you can probably tell, nearly every great ruler seemed obsessed with commissioning their very own city. Machu Picchu was so great that Yopa Yupanqui couldn't help himself but try to imitate it. He went a few miles down the road, up another mountain, and then built his city there. But there are other cities in the area as well, each of them way up in the Andes. There is Sayhuite, Chabamba, Guamanmarca, and Choquesuyus, all of them strikingly similar to Machu Picchu in terms of architectural style and construction techniques. Each of these sites is centered around a pair of main plazas on the very highest crest of a mountain ridge. The cities all contain temples, dwellings for the highest status members of the communities, bathing systems, common houses, and cultivated agricultural areas. And the same can be said of Choquequirao. But this city is a little special in the sense that it had a lot of religious structures. The site also aligns directly with the solstices in June and December, making it one of the most important places in the Inca Empire for ceremonial activities. It was also a very important place following the Spanish conquest in the 1500s. Even after the Inca Empire collapsed, a stronghold of Neo-Inca survivors was established here in 1537. They survived until the death of the last Inca ruler, Tupac Amaru, 40 years later. Why do you think ancient rulers loved building cities so high in the mountains? Let me know your theories below. Biblical scrolls. High above the salty flats of the Dead Sea, way above the Judean desert and its rough brown hills, there are mountain caves filled with treasure. At least the caves used to be filled with treasure. Of course, this is the mountainous region in Israel where the Dead Sea Scrolls were first discovered in the 1950s by Bedouin shepherds. After the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, people from all over descended on the area and dug through every cave they could find in hopes of discovering a fragment and making some cash. It was a catastrophe for archaeologists, but there was one cave that was extraordinarily difficult to reach, a place nicknamed the Cave of Horror. It's about 260 feet directly beneath the top of a cliff, flanked by steep gorges and only accessible by rappelling straight down on a sheer cliff wall. It wasn't exactly an easy place for scavengers to search for scroll fragments 70 years ago. And so it's no surprise that recently dozens of biblical scroll pieces were taken from the cave by professional archaeologists with the latest equipment. Amazingly, these were the first finds of their kind in over 60 years. Archaeologists found fragments written in Greek from the biblical books of Zechariah, Nahum, and the Book of the 12 Minor Prophets. Even more fascinating is that the team discovered a perfectly woven basket from 10,500 years ago, making it the oldest complete basket ever found. They also came across the mummified remains of a child 6,000 years old. Not only was the cave used by early Jews to hide fragments of religious work, but it also appears to have been occupied by cave people. How they managed to get to and from such a precarious spot is a huge mystery. How do you think they got there? Lost Viking Village. On a remote pass in the Norwegian mountains, archaeologists came across a Viking settlement. Of course, nothing remains of the settlement today except marks in the ground where it had once stood. But there was one here, and it was huge. The settlement was found on a mountain trail that's been the source of many discoveries over the past few years. Because of Norway's melting glaciers, the mountain pass here has been revealing thousands of artifacts, things like household items, broken sleds, lost skis, pieces of clothing, and all kinds of other artifacts. A total of 21 structures have been discovered so far in this mountain pass, in an area completely covered by thick juniper bushes. You would never even imagine there had been buildings here because the whole place is overgrown with bushes. There's nothing left except impressions on the ground. It wasn't until archaeologists like Reidar Marstein and Lars Pilo started digging beneath the dirt that they were able to find scraps of outer walls and evidence of low embankments. It took a lot of work, and excavations are still ongoing, but there was a huge city here high up in the mountains between 750 and 1150 AD. That's roughly the entire time the Viking Age lasted. What that means is that while the Vikings were pillaging and terrorizing, and while people in Norway were moving through the mountains from one place to another, this settlement acted as a waypoint. It was a fully functioning city that catered to travelers moving across the brutal landscape. Would you rather explore snow-covered mountaintops or mountains in a warm climate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Sacrifices to the god Zeus. On the top of a Greek mountain, archaeologists found something gruesome and altogether terrifying. They found the skeleton of a teenager, along with scraps of other bones and ashes. Why were there so many bones and ashes on top of the mountain? It's because they had likely been sacrificed to the god Zeus. The teenager was found without a head, laid down on a pile of ash 3,000 years ago at the peak of Lycaon Mountain. It's fascinating because never before have archaeologists found proof that a human sacrifice did take place at an altar to Zeus. Yet here, where a small temple and altar were constructed in dedication to the Lord of Olympus, somebody had been ritualistically murdered. Even though there were all kinds of ritual sacrifices going on in places like Carthage, the Inca Empire, the Aztecs, and many other places, it wasn't a thing for the Greeks. Yet there was one cult so nefarious that even Plato wrote about the horrifying human sacrifices they made in the name of Zeus. Archaeologists always thought these writings were just myths, like what Plato wrote of Atlantis. But now they've discovered an actual sacrificial victim on a mountaintop. It looks like there may have been a real cult that killed people. The White Mountain petroglyphs. Wyoming's White Mountain formed sometime over 30 million years ago. It can be found north of Rock Springs in the Red Desert and boasts some of the most fascinating petroglyphs ever found at this altitude. High up in the mountain, carved into its white rock, you can discover ancient drawings of animals like bison and elk that were at least 1,000 years old. There are also small footprints, handprints, and geometric forms of great mystery scratched into the mountain, and even one picture of a warrior shown brandishing a sword. This is pretty bizarre because the Native American people who drew these petroglyphs, members of tribes like the Shoshone and the Arapaho, didn't use medieval swords. So what was it? That is the question. Thanks for watching. What's your favorite lost city in the mountains? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon. Bye.